She currently serves as the Deputy Director of the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom. She was previously a professor of law at the City University of New York School of Law. She's the author of a book I have assigned in my legal research courses for the last several years now, Data Cartels, the Companies That Control and Monopolize Our Information, published by the Stanford University Press in 2022. Thank you so much, Sarah, for speaking with us today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. It's good to see you all. You know what? Yeah, well, I don't know. I can't decide whether to stand up or not. It's, we'll see. I'll do both. I'll kind of half and half it. So thank you, Nicholas, and the library for hosting me. I am going to talk today about a book I wrote. It was published in 2022 called Data Cartels. And I'm going to cover an introduction about how I wrote the book and why I wrote the book, and then an overview of what I learned, like what it goes to the why, but what I learned about data that I will share with you. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about why it matters, some of the real world implications that we've seen from my research, and I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So if I hopefully will have plenty of time. But if I get near the end and I'm lagging, I'm going to speed it up a little. Just fair warning. I also have to let you know, I made these slides. They are brand new. And I showed them to my mother. Long story. And she called the font aggressive. She said it looked like I am yelling at you. So I apologize. I thought it looked like cool, but what do I know? So I'm sorry in advance for this font. So this is the book that I wrote. It was published by Stanford University Press. It's called Data Cartels, the Companies That Control and Monopolize Our Information. I initially hated the cover, but now I've come to like it. The straws are supposed to be like tubes that information is traveling through. That's what the publisher said. Anyway, but no, I like it now. But that's kind of the representation, and that will make more sense in a minute. So how did I get to the place as a law librarian where I was writing a book with a zingy title like Data Cartels? This is where it started. So in 2017, I was working at the City University of New York in their law library. And somebody sent me this article. If you remember, 2017 was a big time for talking about ICE and being concerned about ICE. There was a new presidential administration had taken over at the beginning of the year, and people had noticed and described immigration and customs enforcement practices as becoming more violent, more dangerous, and more likely to be a series of human rights violations, right? We heard about family separation. We heard about kids in cages. I don't want to diminish the fact that all of these things were happening before this administration, but there was a lot of concern and a lot of attention being drawn to ICE in this point in time. So when Donald Trump said in a press conference, I think we're gonna build an extreme vetting program for immigration in the country, ICE went ahead and held an industry day. So what happens many times when agencies are charged with doing something and they want to work with the public, they want to work with private companies, they'll invite all the private companies to their offices and explain to them what they want. And then the private companies will go off and they'll develop the stuff that the government wants, and they'll have a bidding process, and then you get an extreme vetting program, right? You get whatever infrastructure they're trying to build. So Sam Biddle and Spencer Woodman made a FOIA request. I used to teach a seminar on FOIA. I think FOIA is an awesome and powerful tool. I don't know how well it's working now, but FOIA, it was important to this story because they FOIA'd a list of all the attendees who went to this industry day, because they wanted to send a shot over the bow. They wanted to say, hey, we see you. We see that you are going to work with ICE to build very invasive surveillance. So why did I, besides the fact that I care about human rights, why did I care about this as a law librarian? So here's a sample of one of the pages of responses. I don't remember if I blacked out their private information, but I don't know if that was redacted or if I blacked it out, but you can see that people's names and the companies they work for are listed on the attendee sheet. And the things that I noticed that concerned me was TRSS and LNSSI, because those companies are Thomson Reuters Special Services and LexisNexis Special Services. And I was sitting in my office surrounded by stacks of Westlaw printouts. I had my little LexisNexis pens and stress balls, right? Like, I was pretty much a glorified salesperson for LexisNexis and Thomson Reuters Westlaw. So I was really confused about, like, what they're doing building ICE surveillance. I was like, you know, are they buying subscriptions to their legal research platforms? But DHS already has subscriptions to both of those platforms. Like, I really didn't understand what the connection was. So this naturally made me curious. There are a few things that happened in the interim that made me more curious. So the biggest example of something that made me curious was after I saw that article, a colleague and I, Yasmin Sokar Harker, we wrote a blog post for the American Association of Law Libraries, where we said, "Hey, we just saw this article. What's up? What's up with Westlaw and Lexis? We just really don't understand what's going on, and we're concerned." And within moments of it being posted on AALL's website, it was taken down, and it said taken down, like on the recommendation of general counsel or something like that. And we basically were censored, and there was never really a good explanation for why. So I wanted to know what was going on, and I started digging. And what I found concerned me. It concerned me so much that eventually I wrote a book about it. The easiest way to describe what I found is with this meme. I love a good meme, but I basically found that what I knew as a legal research publisher and as a research platform was changing, right? I thought that Westlaw's main job was to print casebooks, case digests, court reporters, and I thought that, you know, the digital platforms that we were logging onto, the software that we were using was really just the digital iteration of those materials, you know, with some really nice search features, which is awesome. And I didn't understand that their fundamental kind of shape and goal and purpose was changing behind the scenes. And once I started looking into it, and now, I mean, gosh, this was only 5 years ago when this book was published, and some of this now is or 3 years. Some of it now feels almost silly to say out loud because we've come so far, because Moore's Law is real, and we're just, woo, with technology. But traditional publishing was faltering, right? Like, most libraries, unless you're at a school that has a really good paper resources, a lot of libraries weren't getting as many sets of statutes, as many casebooks, as many court reporters, secondary materials. We were just going to hide online. We weren't, you know, buying all the law journals anymore. Things that used to be, you know, kind of bread and butter for these companies were no longer in high demand, right? So they needed new revenue sources. And also, data analytics, that we can see now, I mean, it was a wave of the future. They were moving their kind of publishing center to accommodate this new digital technology, this new digital era, right? And you can see that today. As I said, I redid these slides yesterday. This is how these companies describe themselves now. They don't describe themselves as publishers. Some librarians might say, oh yeah, Westlaw, they're publishers. No. Thomson Reuters Westlaw describes itself as an AI and technology company, right? And similarly, LexisNexis calls itself a global analytics and legal AI company. I will say that before this, I had updated the slides last year. Neither of these companies call themselves AI companies, right? So it's still, the transition that I'm talking about is still very much happening. These products are still very nascent and very in flux, right? So that still didn't answer my question. You know, what are these companies doing with ICE? I still didn't know the answer. But before I go on, I want to give you kind of some basic terminology. I know if you've been to all of these talks, you may have already heard these things, but in order for us to have a shared language, want to give you this information because it's important. What are data analytics? So when I talk about how these companies were moving towards data analytics in 2017, what I mean is that they weren't just publishing, they were engaging in the pursuit of extracting meaning from raw data using specialized computer systems. The systems transform, organize, and model the data to draw conclusions and identify patterns. Okay, so the companies were moving from publishing to doing that. Now, in our most recent iteration, the companies are, sorry, that's totally right, guys. Here are some examples of data analytics so I can differentiate them from AI. So some examples of data analytics are COVID-19 projections, right? Customer behavior analysis. That's why our marketing data, what we click on, what we shop for, is so valuable because they can use our historical choices to predict what we might want in the future, right? Diagnostic assessments. I mean, the way that we can test whether people's genetic makeup or other, physical attributes can lead to certain diagnoses, right? That's very valuable information. Stock market predictions, also very valuable. And then the last one, which will come more into play, predictive policing. And one of the reasons I share all of these is because I want you all to know that I don't think data analytics or AI are categorically bad, right? Some of these things are very beneficial and have the ability to be world-changing in a very positive way, right? So I don't want you to think that my critique is just like kind of an overbroad critique of all technology. I'm not a Luddite. I think that most of these things are wonderful, and who knows, maybe all of them could be wonderful if done correctly. I have no idea. I'm not gonna pretend to understand how data analytics works on a technical level. So now I'm at the slide I wanted to be at. This is what the companies are turning towards now, right? This is what they are selling as AI companies. AI is a little different than data analytics. It's kind of a progression of machine learning science. AI is the application of computer systems to be able to perform tasks or produce output normally requiring human intelligence, especially by applying machine learning techniques to large collections of data. So there are a few reasons I put this picture on here because it's really cool. I didn't make this. I don't want you to think that I wasted any environmental resources. This was already available. I did not say make me a dinosaur sailboat cat. Somebody else did that work. I would love to know what terms they put in to generate this. It's beautiful. But I will say, I know Emily Bender was here. She probably discussed stochastic parrots, and there's a lot of debate over, how human can this technology be? Is there such a thing as AI, or is AI all smoke and mirrors for certain types of algorithms, and it's all, a sham? I'm not talking about that. I am not an AI expert. I just want to throw that out there, recognize that there's a whole body of scholarship about the veracity, the truth of AI, right? So I want to bring it all back to data brokering and data analytics. And my way of doing that is to compare this Venn diagram. So this under data, it would say data analytics. My slides are they don't fit on the screen quite correctly, but the left circle is data analytics and the right circle is AI. And I wanted to show you why they're different, right? So data analytics, which is what they were doing in 2017, looks to the past and the present, right? It does, I mean, they do predictions, but it uses data from the past and present. It doesn't create future data necessarily. So the purpose of data analytics is to understand and interpret existing data, right? They take data sets and they run it through various types of algorithms to create, to interpret things and to create general categorizations, understandings of things. And we mostly use data analytics to make decisions based on patterns and trends, right? Like, oh, you've been buying a lot of, candy. People who buy a lot of candy might, might be going to the movies. I have no idea. But it's all based on historical knowledge. They're not wholesale making cats and dinosaurs on sailboats, right? And data analytics requires a lot of data, right? You need a lot of grist to run through the mill, these algorithmic mills, to make these outputs. But AI is different in that it creates wholesale human intelligence, right? It does new things. It's future looking. And it automates decision making and tasks, just either perfectly or erroneously, depending on whether you are, where you are. But you'll notice the data dependency is very high. So people often ask me, what does the landscape of data brokering look like with AI? I always say that both of them, where they both overlap, is that they both use data. They both need raw data. They both need a ton of data, just data. AI uses more data. So data brokers are even more in demand. That's even a hotter industry when you come to AI, when we kind of move through the continuum of data analytics to the future, right, to these more data-hungry systems. So why did publishers swerve off the highway and move towards data analytics? And part of the answer is that every industry now is a data industry. And I engage with it. I am wearing jewelry that collects tons of biometric data about me all the time. I carry this around. It collects tons of data about me all the time. If your home appliances are part of the Internet of Things, if they're hooked up to the internet, if your refrigerator tells you when to buy buy more milk, you are part of the data industry, right? Cars, they track how hard you brake. That's actually part of LexisNexis report. So that every industry is a data industry. Publishing is no exception, right? Publishing is also a data industry. And this data pyramid shows kind of where these companies are making their money. I had to add generative intelligence at the top over the years because it didn't exist in the original one. And I'll tell you, the original version of this, I saw in I'm going to say this word, only librarians are going to know what it is. It was in a Clarivate annual report, right? So this data analytics, this data value pyramid comes from librarianship, it comes from publishing. So when I started doing library and legal work in the early aughts, a long time ago, really what we had was the two bottom parts of the pyramid, right? A legal research company made their money selling quote unquote raw data. It really was, it is information because it's not as broken down as raw data, but a court opinion, a statute from Georgia, right? A section of a treatise. And then they also sold organized data. So I could, on CD-ROM, look at a collection of cases and run a Boolean search and find all cases about dog bites, right? So I was being sold data as a service. As we got into the 2010s, suddenly I could also be sold by these companies platforms and applications as a service. The internet became not just attached to a wall and a phone. What are those called? Those little an Ethernet or a modem? Yeah, modem. Thank you. Now we have Wi-Fi and we could move around, and it became possible to take information with us on the road, and the internet really started to kind of explode at that point. And software companies started creating digital platforms that you could log on the internet. All of you did not even have to deal with CD-ROMs. But there was this transition, and all of a sudden, companies like Westlaw, companies like Lexis, all publishing companies, Elsevier, which is also part of Reed Elsevier, LexisNexis, they could all give us platforms, and applications. In addition to raw data, organized data, they could give us these systems where we could do natural language searches, we could put cases we liked in folders, we could share them with friends, and that was a really exciting innovation. So in 2017, the companies really started focusing on data analytics, and that's the blue stripe in this pyramid, predictive and prescriptive analytics. So they could take all of the case law in their system with all of the statutes and, guess what a particular judge might say based on their historic opinions, right? Guess how a particular circuit might find in a particular, legal issue. So they could make predictions and prescriptions. They could tell you what, because once you know, hey, the Seventh Circuit's going to be the most favorable, they can say, you should file in the Seventh Circuit. Or I guess by the time you're in circuit court, you really don't get that choice. You can file in the Southern District of New York. Sorry about that. Sorry about that legal accident. I once, as a librarian, called a Supreme Court justice a judge, and never do this when you summer. A brand name first year attorney was so mean about it that I cried. Don't do that. Don't do that to your librarians. Don't do that to your researchers. But yeah, so sorry. I'm not going to cry this time. I'm fine. So now where these companies are going and what they're able to do with AI is create entirely new intelligence. They can make, answers as a service. So they can mock up a brief for you based on what a certain judge might like. They can, do all sorts of things. I've been working at the American Library Association, so I haven't seen all of their AI tools and tricks, but I know that they claim that they can be an assistant at your side, drafting for you, drafting with you, right? That's completely new information that they are generating whole cloth. So this pyramid is important because it shows the progress of data and data analytics. It shows the value of various types of data and data analytics. And it's important to point out that the top of the pyramid is the most valuable part. So this is why these companies are so focused on answers as a service. It's because in order to make predictions and in order to generate intelligence, you have to have a ton of information, and you create something that's proprietary. You're creating something that other companies can't make. So not only are you able to sell raw data and research platforms, you're able to sell brand new information that you've made with an algorithm, by running your, all of your massive warehouses of data through various machine learning systems, right? And you create this proprietary information that only Westlaw can make or only Lexis can make, and that is super valuable and super unique to those companies, right? It's very special. So when you think about the top of the pyramid, the reason I focused on a few companies is because there are only a few companies with market dominance in all sorts of types of information. If you think about data ownership, in the 90s and up until today, there's been a lot of consolidation in information fields, right? We've seen newspapers collapse into one another. We've seen legal products and legal technologies collapse into one another. In my book, I think I wrote at one point, it gets to the point where when there's a new legal technology company Case Text or Ross, and we get really excited. As librarians, we don't get that excited because we can already foresee them getting swallowed up by a bigger, by one of the big legal research companies, right? So that means that there are a few companies with a lot of informational power. And I use Reed Elsevier, LexisNexis as an example, not to pick on them, but just because they hit all the boxes. So Reed Elsevier, LexisNexis has more academic information than any company in the world. And they also have been buying products like Interfolio and Pure that give them background details and analytics and data about what scholars are doing, who they work with, where they apply, who they, what labs they're in, their preprints, et cetera, et cetera. They have a huge amount of information about academics, and they have more academic output than any other company easily. They also have the biggest news archives in the world. So they have thousands of news sources archived back, back when I used to do library work, it was like they had archives to the 90s, sometimes before if they had been digitized, right? So tons of information. Obviously, they're a duopoly for legal information. They have it all, right? And financial information. They have companies, or they have acquired companies like Securities Mosaic and other companies that have scraped and digitized SEC filings and financial news and financial data for decades, right? So they have a wealth of financial information. What I didn't realize, and what the linchpin to all of my concerns were, and this is like, oh, okay, I see what's happening now. They are also the government's biggest data brokers. LexisNexis and Thomson Reuters fuel all of the raw data into the government's surveillance systems, into state, local, federal government systems, including law enforcement. I didn't know that because they didn't advertise them together. As a law librarian, I had no idea that LexisNexis and Thomson Reuters were also data brokers. And I was the first person to say it out loud. And I was telling Nicholas, it was very scary and isolating to do that. And now it's like common knowledge. We all talk about it. Back in 2017, it was such a revelation to me that I felt compelled to write about it. And so that is where this book came from. So now I'm going to point out really quickly a few of the issues that kind of went along, besides the obvious one, like building surveillance and policing, and I'm going to show why leaving it in the hands of data brokers to do that work is especially problematic. So when Thomson Reuters, LexisNexis, any data broker, any AI company, when they advertise, this is what it looks like. It looks like something magical, mystical, like you're getting all the answers in this pad because the world is beautiful. This is what it actually is, guys. This is technology, okay? Technology is a Play-Doh extruder. You get a glob of data, right? That's what like Thomson Reuters and LexisNexis give the government. You get a clump of data. It might be mixed together. There might be like pieces of cat hair or carpeting. It depends on who's been playing with it. I don't know who made that data. So you have it. You have a wad of data. And then you squish it through some sort of algorithm or some sort of, software system. You squish it in there. And look, you get something new you can sell. You get predictions or you get, a brief that a computer wrote for you. So cool, right? And the reason I like to use the extruder visual is because they use an extruder visual also. So you can see the company takes primary research, public records, aka personal information about all of us, proprietary data, like, I don't know, a case law database, treatises, who knows, news articles, contributory databases, unstructured records and structured records. Notice that a lot of this language is very vague and gauzy because they're not going to tell you what goes into the sausage, right? So especially in this middle part. So when the extruding happens, like you see it's going through the machine, all these like pictures are circling around. And read Elsevier LexisNexis is decreasing content volume and increasing content quality. Something magic is happening in there. And then, at the end, there are all of these new products that they can sell, right? Some of the products are helpful, some of them are not, and some of them, it's up to you to decide. But they can sell entity resolution. So figuring out who you are, who you aren't, where you are, just figuring things out about you. They can link you to other people. They can cluster people. They can create heat maps, heat lists. And they can do all sorts of other complex analyses, like, I don't know, contracted analyses with ICE, right? Or partnering with, I don't know, Palantir, companies like that. So the company's other business, we know about their legal research business. I want to tell you a little bit about their other business. They call it Risk and AI Solutions. So TRSS is about risk strategies, and it's about assessing how risky we all are. Are you going to commit insurance fraud? Are you going to go to work every day? Should we rent an apartment to you? Are you a safe bet? Or are you a red flag? That's the business of risk assessment in data analytics. here's how LexisNexis does it, and Thomson Reuters does the same thing. I mean, and honestly, a lot of companies who work as data brokers, this is kind of how data brokering works. They create a universal ID number for you, like a social security number for you that's a code that is your code. They have millions. This slide is old. It's just, to me, the clearest depiction of it. I actually was going to get a new one, but this one's prettier. Back at the time that I did this, probably 2019, 283 million unique U.S. customer identities. And if you have them, if you live in California or somewhere where you can ask them to expunge your identity, once they get a new piece of data about you, let's say you, update your voter record or have any sort of interaction with your credit card, they can just start a new one, right? So you have these like sticky universal identifiers that are attached to each of us. Then it's like whenever they get data about you, they just throw it, they stick it to you. It's like a rubber band ball. They put it on you, so you get bigger and bigger. And you see the little emblems around the middle picture. You get geolocational data, biometric data, face prints, gait tracking, DNA, any government interactions, so court interactions, licenses, credit card, financial information, all that data. Data from apps and other services on your phone, data from your automobile. There was a lawsuit. There are actually several now lawsuits. There was an expose in the New York Times by Kashmir Hill 2 years ago now about how LexisNexis was working with General Motors to sell data about how you drive to insurance companies without any accounting for who is actually behind the wheel. And then basic information about where you live, where you work, etc. And so after they make this big file of you, then they use that file, right? They run it through machine learning algorithms to see who you associate with, where you are, what are you most likely to do, and they make, enhanced information that they can sell. And if you were wondering, for the thing in the middle, that data comes from over 10,000 unique sources. And if there's an error in your data file and you say, hey, Lexis, this isn't my address, they'll say, oh, well, you have to figure out which source it came from, and you have to tell them to fix it out of those 10,000 sources. So here are some of the industries that LexID linking technology works in today. So they're big players in selling your data to insurance companies, selling predictive data about your insurance risk, financial and retail markets, government agencies, so that includes law enforcement, and healthcare, which to me is the creepiest. And somebody asked how they make like these health metrics based on where you live, your age, your socioeconomic status, all sorts of factors like that. And whether it's accurate or not, they sell it to your healthcare providers. So that's comfortable and great. So these practices raise concerns, at least they did to me, for our profession, including a lack of regulatory safeguards. All this is completely permissible in the United States. These companies don't operate the same way in the EU, and it's not because the GDPR is perfect, but it's because it creates enough friction that it's not as lucrative or easy to do this kind of work. Like it's too expensive to make a robust system that has those types of accountability safeguards. So even these imperfect safeguards kind of rein in this type of data brokering. But we don't have that in the United States. There are no promises from the legal research platforms to firewall our research data and all of our files on Twin or wherever. There's nothing, they will not promise to firewall that from any of their data brokering products. And we've asked numerous times. And even if they say they're going to do it in the present, they won't promise to do it in the future. And that's because our data is so valuable that if they can find a way to use it, they're going to want to use it. It's very lucrative. And there's no limits on data collection and use, and there's a high motivation to maximize both, especially now that AI needs more and more and more data, right? So I just wanted to show you real quick who they partner with and then Q&A. This is, I found yesterday, they partner with Palantir. So whenever you hear something scary or concerning that Palantir is doing, the fuel for that work, like kind of the data-rich soil that they provide, right? The environment that they provide is likely provided by one or both of these companies, and other data brokers too, right? And other systems as well. But Accurate is a part of LexisNexis, and this is specifically a system that they're building together. One thing to note too, so after 9/11, the federal government realized that there was a lack of communication between various law enforcement systems in the United States. So they created these things called nerve centers. Have any of you heard of nerve centers? Okay. Yeah, see, somebody's in there. They were super controversial at the time because there were these like massive kind of policing data warehouses. And they were done, they were being created with government oversight. They still exist today, but they were civil rights organizations were concerned about them. These companies create the same system, so they have these like policing kind of warehouses where all the law enforcement agencies gather information, share information, and there's no government oversight for these systems, right? So it's the same. It's like they're creating private nerve centers that we don't know what they're doing because we don't have any regulatory oversight at all. So that's just something to consider when it comes to policing. I would love for somebody to research that more. I've never had the bandwidth, but I think it's an interesting topic. I'm just throwing it out there if anybody wants to write a fun law review article. So one of the main concerns that I wanted to raise, because this honestly, to me, is the most enduring concern about any of these systems, is about accuracy. So as we saw, I am not an expert in algorithmic bias, nor am I a data expert, but there are whole bodies of literature about how, that extruder is problematic because algorithms are made by people and they're inherently biased, right? And similarly, the data sets are also biased. So if you live in an over-policed community, there will be more data about you in the data system, right? So when there's some sort of heat map drawn out or there's some sort of warning list, created, your name is more likely to come to the top, not because you are more likely to commit a crime, but because your name is in the system more, right? In fact, there have been studies. There was a study, the Chicago police system used predictive technology, and they found, what they found is that the technology was really good at finding who was the most, whose names were the most plentiful in a data set and not who was most likely to commit a crime, right? So there's data bias and there's algorithmic bias, both which have their entire own universes of like research and thought, and there are accuracy concerns. So beyond those two bias concerns, sometimes the data is just wrong. And that's when people get really, really screwed. Like, have you ever seen news stories about people getting arrested because like the facial, recognition got their face wrong? So there are so many stories and lawsuits from different, the different industries, the insurance industry, law enforcement, etc. Here are just a few examples. So in Texas, last month, a man sued LexisNexis and Geico after a data mix-up spiked his premiums. So Texas man's claims that his data was mixed up with somebody else who had, a different claims history than he did, and then he was unable to get insurance at the proper rate, right? And in 2024, a contractor in DC sued for the alleged improper screening of hopeful tenants. So there are other stories about this as well. People get blacklisted from being able to rent apartments because the tenant screening software uses LexisNexis data, which has incorrect information about potential tenants in it. So my favorite article on this topic is called "When LexisNexis Makes a Mistake, You Pay for It," right? So beyond, I always want to highlight, if you are concerned with policing, that, kind of the problematic nature of policing and other government functions, but even in the private sector, we have to consider that we have to consider how the work we do and why the work we do is in any way interconnected with these types of practices and what that means for our data So criminal justice and beyond. And I always my kids, like, they hate, I showed them this slide and they were like, Mom, that's terrible. You are a fool. They're high schoolers. They're really mean. But the reason I chose this slide is because I know that I talk about a lot of things that feel very tinfoil hat and kind of creepy, and they're not creepy. They're really cute. So I am happy to answer questions. But yeah, that's the overview of my research.
Sort of a maybe basic question, but I definitely understand how Lexis gets all the sort of like legal information about what cases people have been involved in, and even news information, etc. I'm still trying to understand, how do they get personal information aside from like the data that we put in when we create an account? And are they buying that data from somewhere else, or like where are they getting that data from? Also, thank you for the wonderful presentation.
So the question is where is LexisNexis getting this data from? So, and I'm going to tell you this, okay, I'm really going to like put my tinfoil hat on because I'm not going to pretend to know exactly what is happening inside of LexisNexis, but this is what I imagine. I mean, we know that they get their data from over 10,000 sources. Some of it is from public records. So the guy who invented data brokering, his name was Hank Asher, and he has such a fascinating story. This amazing author named Mackenzie Funk wrote a book called The Hank Show, and it's all about Hank Asher. If you are interested in learning about the wild start of data brokering, it's such a good book. But this guy figured out that data in public records was like underappreciated real estate. Like, he could go to a DMV and get all of this data for like $200, right? And it was good because it raised revenue for the government, but it was also affordable. And so he figured out, like, this was in, I think, the 90s, like at the kind of the very start of this type of data processing, he figured out how to link together multiple drives and kind of slice and dice that information and create kind of a system for sorting it. And after 9/11, another really great book is Byron Tao's book. I cannot remember the name of it, but he writes about this in depth. After 9/11, the government saw, oh wow, our law enforcement agencies aren't communicating very well, and these private entities came to the White House and said, we can solve your problems, and they made these algorithms. The algorithms were, if you want to talk about algorithmic bias, those algorithms are a great place to start for a number of reasons. They made these really questionable algorithms to really start kind of the work of algorithm-driven policing, right? Yes, means of control. That's Byron Tao's book. So good. I had the opportunity to review it for Lawfare. And so I had the opportunity to really like synthesize it. It's excellent. I highly recommend it. So that is how public records, that's kind of the way the system started, and that's how public records collection really started, right? Underappreciated real estate, our records everywhere for cheap. But then once the system kind of got all that, they realized that credit card companies were also collecting information, right? And all of these other companies, and it was for sale. And then we really went online. We got these things. These things had social media apps in them. And social media apps collect all sorts of data about us, and they'll sell that too to advertisers, whoever wants to buy it, right? So there were these kind of downstream data sources where data was for sale. And then there were also small scale data brokers, like first tier, low level data brokers that were just collecting like a few types of things. So these big data brokers either acquired them or made deals with them to share or buy information, right? So before you know it, they've amassed thousands and thousands of data sources. And as far as our information goes as Lexis and Westlaw users, and this is my concern, and this is what I wish they would promise to firewall. So we all have Lex IDs. The Lex IDs have all of those data sources in them. What is stopping them from taking the data about us and what we're doing on Lexis or Westlaw and putting it with our Lex ID? I just don't know. And I wish they would clarify that. And I am not sure. So if anyone's out there who can clarify that, that would be great. But yeah, that's my concern, is that all of our data is associated with our universal identifier, and I don't know where the contours of that are.
So I've been kind of like in the data broker space for a little bit too. So also just like a horrifying answer to your question is like fairly innocuous apps like the weather app have also been known to sell your information and like your geolocation information. So even things that you think like are not too susceptible are all kind of engaging in this. But like a question for you that I'm really curious about is just like how do we like deal with this? So like two kind of sub questions. So one particularly like in the legal field, knowing that like Westlaw and Lexis like have such monopolies on this. I didn't know that they were the biggest sellers to the government. So what do we do when we all rely on that like on a day-to-day basis? Like are there mass movements to kind of like force Lexis to kind of at least separate that from its like legal research capacities, or like what are we as lawyers doing? And then also too, just as people concerned about this problem generally, like in your research, have you found like what are the avenues to kind of approach this? Like there's some litigation that's going on, but also like in terms of like some other people say like we have to pursue it like through legislation, but like that also doesn't seem super viable. So like how do we fix it?
Yeah. So to answer the first question, what I always say to people who use Westlaw and Lexis and to legal professionals is you're their customers, right? So you can tell them when you're concerned with things. They want your business. They want to work with you. So it's okay to open up that conversation. I will say, so one thing I saw a lot after in the midst of doing this book and et cetera, like most of your Lexis and Westlaw reps, they don't know about this either. And so they're just nice people who want to help you use Westlaw and Lexis. So like being, making that approach, to open those doors of conversation as consumers to say, hey, we really don't like that you're doing this. Or, one thing that I was like, can you promise us that you will never use our data this way? Kind of set up some of those safeguards. I wrote a paper before I even started doing research for this book about maybe using the code of ethics and kind of our confidentiality standards as like something to fall back on. That article's somewhere in the ether. But yeah, what levers do we have as consumers who are also legal professionals? I think that that's important and useful to think about. And as far as solving the larger data broker issue, you named a lot of really good tools that have different, unfortunately, levels of potential viability right now. So yeah, the first, I really think that legislation, comprehensive federal legislation that doesn't make a patchwork of kind of various privacy laws across all the states, but really sets some GDPR-like standards for the entire country. And I've also heard from people who in the data broker industry who also want that, because it's really hard to try to cater to a whole patchwork of privacy rules and regulations. So it would be much more efficient for all of us if there were just some basic parameters. Like, okay, if you're in the data broker sandbox, here are the things you have to do for consumers, right? So I think that is also a useful thing to think about, and something people have tried to do, but like you said, have not had much success with, unfortunately. Another angle we've seen people try to use is antitrust enforcement. So when companies become very dominant, it is very hard to push back because there are no other options, right? So welcoming new options and facilitating startups and creative, innovative ideas is a nice idea. And also ensuring that these companies, that there are consumer protections in place, right? Because at the end of the day, we are all consumers that are subject to these data schemes and just by existing in the world. So, regulations from antitrust, but also from consumer protection entities would be helpful as well, I think. Yeah.
I wanted to build on some of that and start by saying some of the very early stuff that was happening here also was developed by what became IMS, that now has some other name, that's Sackler from the famous opioid family. developed and used for selling prescription data and for targeting people who they could try to get hooked on opioids.